For these reasons, I can no longer call myself a progressive. I don't really call myself a Democrat either.
I'm going to get into criticizing this video from Dave Rubin as quickly as possible. If you guys are not interested in me or my position or why I'm making this video, I guess you could skip ahead, but it seems kind of important to disclose my own bias or my own interest or where I stand in as few words as possible before I get into these specifics. I'm a critic of the left. This YouTube channel, if you subscribe to it, is going to contain more criticism of the left. But I see there's a current anti-left-wing movement that from my perspective is completely detached from reality, and some of the most vocal leaders of opinion in this movement, strangely, are former members of left-wing organizations and parties. One of the delusions is that the left is now worse than it was just a few decades ago. This is said again and again so easily, apparently with no evidence taken into consideration aside from, oh, those pesky SJWs on Twitter. Can you believe this outrageous post I saw on Facebook? Please, please, I'm only 39, but I can remember when making excuses for mass murder in China and Russia were the definitive hallmarks of the left. I grew up with that. I grew up surrounded by people who, on the one hand, were making excuses for the worst atrocities committed by communism, even for just the poverty and starvation, intermittent starvation that existed in communist countries, and on the other hand, who were engaged in lionizing labor union leaders and trying to make the general strike into the basis of social progress. It is just not true that the left has gotten worse within my lifetime or your lifetime if you're anyone watching this video. The left has gotten better. The internet may have gotten worse. The internet may have given voices to people who before never had a shot in hell at having their opinion on the 6 o'clock news. I think the world's a better place, not a worse place, because now at least those people have a chance to meet one another, have their views challenged, look up facts on Wikipedia. I think the whole world, step by step, is actually getting less ignorant. But it's true, it's also getting more self-righteous. But if you think, oh, if only you could go back to the glory days of the 1980s and the left-wing movement, I really wonder, is this what you're looking back at? Are you looking back at the old days of people straight up making excuses to your face for Mao Zedong massacring people in Tibet? That's the left wing I grew up with. And when I look at Bernie Sanders is wrong about some things. But Bernie Sanders is right about and willing to address such a list of fundamentally important things that I can never have addressed by conservatives of the right. I'm not in a position to reject the left and take up a better alternative. The position I'm in is either I engage with the left as a critic trying to address what's wrong with it, which you're going to see on this YouTube channel, or I can set up my own tiny, pathetic political party and work really hard to maybe get 500 votes and maybe get a certain kind of platform, or message, into the newspapers and get people, a few hundred people, a few thousand people to think about things from a slightly different political perspective. That's what's possible in my lifetime. Those are my options. If I go knocking on the door of the Conservative Party, are they going to talk to me about ecology? Are they going to talk to me about indigenous peoples, indigenous life? Are they going to talk to me serious about education reform, healthcare, just the cost of tuition in universities? There's such a checklist of things. Bernie Sanders didn't have to work hard. Bernie Sanders, just by mentioning how important these issues were, got a huge gust of public opinion in his sails. There's tremendous popular enthusiasm for a left-wing figure like Bernie Sanders, despite everything you may say that's wrong with him. That's the era we're living with, when I can at least say the left has the potential to make positive change. And when I look at the right and conservatives, I see no such potential. And I hope the right will reform too. I think it would be wonderful if we had intense and sincere competition between left and right. But let's be honest with ourselves. Let's be honest with ourselves, Dave. Reaching out to Dave Rubin here. This is an entirely phony rejection of the left that you're engaged in. There is just no truth to the fact that you're now looking to the Republican Party or other conservative elements to achieve the type of social change you want. There's no truth to that at all. All you're engaged in ultimately is I'd say, an appeal to emotion. And to some extent I can sympathize, primarily because you feel burned by a sort of stereotype about left-wing academia. Now let's talk about that a little bit more as we go here. Let's see what that is.
Do you believe in free speech? Do you believe that people should be judged by their character, not their skin color? Do you believe in freedom of religion? If you believe these things, you're probably not a progressive. Progressives used to say, I may disagree with what you say, but I'll fight to the death for your right to say it. Not anymore. Banning speakers whose opinions you don't agree with from college campuses, that's not progressive.
Let's just concede the point here, but put it in context. Banning speakers for being offensive. Does this happen on left-wing liberal college campuses? Does this happen at a stereotypical liberal arts campus? It happens once in a while. It does. It absolutely does. What are we comparing it to, Dave? Brigham Young University? Are you comparing it to a conservative Mormon university? Are you comparing it to a conservative Jewish university? Dave and I both have Jewish heritage, by the way. Are you comparing it to even one example of a conservative Christian university? Any of these issues, this checklist of issues you've just mentioned, of having non-discrimination on the basis of, shall we say, creed, as opposed to the content of your character? You really think, if you start spending some more time on conservative Christian college campuses, conservative Mormon college campuses. Hey, I've got experience around the world. I've spent time on conservative Buddhist college campuses. Do you think if right now we go to Taiwan, Hong Kong, Japan, conservatism is not uniquely attached to Christianity, but it is uniquely attached to religion. The values you're talking about, Dave, the values you find lacking on liberal arts campuses, do you really sincerely believe that is more or less of a problem if you take this same discourse, if you take this same criticism to conservative college campuses?
Prohibiting any words not approved of as politically correct, that's not progressive.
We had a new professor hired at the University of Toronto to teach in the Indigenous Studies Department. I forget, it may even be called in a more political correct manner, the Native Peoples Department or First Nations Department. And his first lecture, after his newly having been hired to this position, throughout the first hour of the lecture, he consistently and insistently referred to Native women as squaws. It was laugh out loud hilarious, but of course something like 60% of the people in the audience for this lecture were themselves Native Canadian, what do you say in America, Native American. And we're flabbergasted. It was astounding that someone in this liberal university context would be using what's basically a racial slur as if it's value neutral. Squaw in Canada amongst Native people, for a white man to say it behind a podium in this way, it was shocking. It was unbelievable. Now, they didn't interrupt his lecture. There were kind of rumblings of discontent in the audience. But during the breaks, I think after 1 hour, after the first 50 minutes, whatever it was, there was kind of a bathroom break. Someone took him aside and said, "What the hell are you doing? Do you not know?" And, it's this very anticlimactic human thing. He got on stage at the start of the second hour and he just said in this, harried way, "Look, I didn't know it was offensive." This is what you got your PhD in. And you didn't know it was offensive. You didn't know. Wow. This is not an undergraduate student. This is not a high school student. All right? These things happen. These things happen when people talk about the history of Africa, history of Native peoples in Canada. Sometimes people don't know that they're using loaded words. Sometimes the process of education is not just going from the professor to the audience. This is a case where the audience ended up educating the professor. It's a real problem. It's a problem that plays out sometimes tragically and sometimes comically on liberal university campuses. Dave, do you actually believe this is less of a problem at Brigham Young University? Do you believe that a conservative religious university in the United States of America, any of them, you take your pick, is genuinely more of a bastion for freedom of speech than a liberal arts college? Do you sincerely believe this is less of a problem? Or do you believe that the degree of censorship and authoritarian control of expression is worse when the powers of the censor are in the hands of people who believe that they're on a mission from God to preserve the moral character of their students.
Putting trigger warnings on books, movies, music, anything that might offend people, that's not progressive either.
Again, I see the same fundamental problem here. The left is not being compared to anything, and there are many reasonable comparisons to make. Have you, Dave, spent any time in the libraries of conservative right-wing universities? Whether that's conservative Buddhism or conservative Christianity or conservative Mormonism. If you had, I defy you, sincerely, do you think this problem of putting a warning label on a book or putting a warning label on a CD-ROM, do you really think that's more of a problem at left-wing liberal arts colleges, of all places, than it is at genuinely conservative institutions? Maybe you can point to some little case study, some little example, maybe something you heard about on Twitter or Facebook. But I think the whole point of journalism is to move past emotive, knee-jerk reactions to some isolated, anecdotal bullshit you saw on Twitter. And at least to deal with as a hypothetical thought experiment. Okay, if people have this problem, that they're surprised there's maybe a book about Adolf Hitler and there's a trigger warning on the cover that this contains photographs of, corpses discovered at a concentration camp. I can imagine a library deciding to put a warning on that. Do you really think the censorship in university libraries is worse in that context than, I'll mention a context I'm very familiar with, the libraries within conservative Buddhist universities? I haven't spent much time at Brigham Young, but I don't think anyone's claiming that conservative Mormons are flying the flag for freedom of speech more than the liberal arts campuses, the corrupt and decadent liberal arts campuses of America that you're complaining so bitterly about.
This regressive ideology doesn't judge people as individuals, but as a collective. If you're black or female or Muslim or Hispanic or member of any other minority group, you're judged differently than the most evil of all things, a white Christian male.
Let's pretend that he's right in making this claim. And let's pretend, unlike my former comments, that this problem is actually at parity. Let's imagine that basically what he's saying, the problem is racism. And let's just pretend that this is equally tremendous a problem on the left as it is on the white Christian male right. If so, would you not be forced to concede the point that the left, at least, is engaged in a rigorous self-examination on this very issue? That there's a great deal of hand-wringing and agonizing over just how racist they are. That there are constant accusations and allegations of racism and bias within the left, exactly the kind of SJW antics that you lament on Twitter. Even if this ludicrous premise were true, if the problem was that left-wingers view people as being in categories and that white Christian males do not, that, for example, white Christians do not have a problem with regarding people as either going to hell after they die or being saved. It's a pretty significant category. Divide the world into two on that one. As if white Christians do not have a problem with perceiving people in different races. As if this were a myopia, a condition unique to the left. If you believe this is true, Dave, this would force you to grudgingly respect the left for exactly what it is you despise them for, in fact. Which is that they're constantly engaged in self-examination, self-recrimination, forcing confessions out of one another for their latent biases.
The regressive left ranks minority groups in a pecking order to compete in a kind of oppression Olympics. Gold medal goes to the most offended.
Now, even this, I have to question. Is this really a unique trait of the left? Is this something that's even more of a problem on the left than is on the right? Have you never seen right-wing politicians reaching out to the audience and saying, there, sitting right there, is Jim, who's come back from the war with 2 legs missing. There's Sally. She grew up on a farm with no electricity where they still had to pump the water by hand. Have you really never seen right-wing or conservative politicians reaching out to their audience and the base of their support by appealing to their sense of suffering, of unjust suffering, and of oppression? I see it all the time. And I'll tell you something, it's not unique to white Christian American conservatism. I see it even in the conservatism of Japan, Taiwan, etc. I really do sympathize with the frustration many people may feel, especially if you're spending your time on left-wing Twitter, with the oppression Olympics. This is a problem within many provinces of politics I've dealt with. But I think you have to understand that the type of appeal to emotion here, it's cynically employed by right-wing politicians in exactly the same way that's employed by left-wing politicians and pundits. It's just a different type of oppression and different selected minorities that they're picking out from the crowd, trying to make propaganda claims out of.
I'm a married gay man, so you might think that I appreciate the government forcing a Christian baker or photographer or florist to act against their religion in order to cater, photograph, or decorate my wedding. But you'd be wrong. A government that can force Christians to violate their conscience can force me to violate mine. If a baker won't bake you a cake, find another baker. Don't demand that the state tell him what to do with his private business.
As throughout the video, I feel that Dave Rubin is really talking about this from the position of a callow teenager and not as a grown adult who can appeal to real-world examples and real-world experience. I used to live in Saskatchewan, Canada. That's a sparsely populated part of Canada. I was informally offered a job. It never happened, but it was proposed to me I might take on a job as a sort of advocate for a group of First Nations people. So these are Indigenous people, what you would call American Indians in the United States. And my immediate reaction was, well, wait a minute, I'm not a lawyer. Like, I don't have any why do you think I could do this job? And I was told, no, that's not the nature of the job. The problem is that the vast majority of business owners are so racist that when members of this tribe need to get the electricity fixed, when they need to get the sewers fixed, when they need almost anything done that requires technical expertise, if they phone up the service provider, the company, they won't even get a reply. And if you have someone with a white voice, someone speaking with a white accent, this is how it is, rural Canada. People can often tell by your accent whether you're a native or whether you're a descendant of the colonists. Maybe they'll hear you out. But the most common thing to hear back is that when you're describing the address, they'll ask you, is this or is this not for those blank? It's only due to YouTube censorship that I'm not going to fill in the type of racist swear words that are used for Native people in Canada. Okay? It's a huge problem. Dave Rubin is telling you, if you can't get a wedding cake catered because of religious conservatives, just find another business that'll make you a wedding cake. There are large parts of the world where we're dealing with essential services. I mean, ultimately, you can bake your own wedding cake, but you probably can't fix your own electricity, can't fix your own sewers, can't fix your own broken down truck. And when you're denied access to those services because of your ethnicity, because of your creed, because of your beliefs, when you're living in a society that is majority bullies turned against you, yes, Dave, you do need the protection of the state. And you're dead wrong in describing your position as progressive and liberal. Have you ever heard of John Stuart Mill? No, Dave, you're dead wrong on this one. This is a real problem, and you've once again picked a shallow, silly example that you heard off of Facebook or YouTube or Twitter. You've put absolutely no thought into it, and you failed, as always, to compare the left to the alternative. If the left is really failing to deliver on these issues, if the left is really failing to deliver on gay rights or on minority religious rights, you tell me if you sincerely believe that the conservatives are going to do a better job that they're offering to deliver something better in Western politics in the next 20 years. It's bleak, but as bad as the left may be in these respects you point out, the right is worse.
I'm pro-choice, but a government that can force a group of Catholic nuns, literally called the Little Sisters of the Poor, to violate their faith and pay for abortion-inducing birth control can force anyone to do anything.
This is a completely insincere and phony argument that I've heard right-wing libertarians use back when they were freaking out because taxpayers' dollars were going to be used to buy pro-homosexual books that would go into libraries. They managed to get the right wing all riled up at the idea of their taxpayers' dollars being used to buy books they would disapprove of. Well, guess what? If you're anti-war, your taxpayers' dollars are going to pay for a war, to buy bombs that are dropped on people. If you're anti-abortion, your taxpayers' dollars are going to support abortion. This is part of the basic reality of the state. Democrat, Republican, frankly, even communist. It doesn't matter. This is one of the fundamental features of modern political society. When you pay taxes, you are paying money for social services, social policies, even wars that you may profoundly disagree with. Wake up and realize that this is not something that distinguishes the mainstream left from the mainstream right.
Today's progressivism has become a faux moral movement.
You're calling the mainstream left a faux moral movement at a time when the mainstream right is using the slogan, "Make America Great Again." You may remember other conservative faux moral movements, such as the moral majority, such as the common sense revolution, shout out to Ontario, or you may just remember that there was a wave of right-wing conservative opinion that swept George W. Bush into power at a time when they claimed that Bill Clinton had so sullied the moral character of the office of the president that George W. Bush was someone who would restore the integrity. He was a godly man who would restore the integrity of that office. People on the right really sincerely believe that, and I'm old enough to remember it. Which side really has a problem with engaging in faux moral movements? Maybe the answer is both. Maybe really there's a lot of self-examination that needs to go on both sides. But to say that the left only, or especially, is guilty of hollow moral posturing. Dave, I don't know what planet you're living on. It seems like you're only and unfairly criticizing one half of the equation without even really considering the alliances you're making, like, for example, the assholes at PragerU who hosted this video.
The battle of ideas has been replaced by a battle of feelings, and outrage has replaced honesty.
Dave, you're old enough to remember George W. Bush. This is not ancient history. Would you say that the mainstream conservatives began the Iraq War on a basis of the theater of ideas, the free market of ideas, honesty? Or was it based on a manipulative appeal to emotion, such as you're complaining the left wing engages in? Now, what you say about the left may be true. Maybe they make insincere appeals to emotion and identity politics to achieve their political aims and goals. But ironically, those are political aims and goals you sympathize with and support, such as less war, fewer wars, better social services, education, healthcare. Whereas the same type of dishonest manipulation of feelings on the right is serving an agenda and a set of objectives you fundamentally don't support and disagree with. Now, questions of honesty and integrity matter on the left and the right. You could make a list of unbelievable lies told by Bill Clinton and unbelievable lies told by George W. Bush. Don't get me wrong, I'm not uncritically adulating the left. What I find astounding and unbelievable about Dave Rubin's approach to this topic is that item by item, every single problem he points out with the left is worse with the right is worse with conservatives, especially if we just take that step of putting a human face on it and talking about Christian conservatives, Mormon conservatives, or even Buddhist conservatives. The exact same problems which he's presenting as his justification for why he left the left, why he gave up on the left, they are problems to an equal or greater extent on the right. All of us have to make hard choices. I don't want to join Canada's Democrat Party. I don't want to join the Liberal Party. They're both morally rebarbative to me. There's a long list of things I think they've done wrong in the past, they're doing wrong now. It's terrible. But when I make a checklist of the fundamental policies I'm looking for, when I'm looking for a party that's willing to even ask the questions I'm asking, there's no way I could even consider joining the Conservative Party as an option. You watching this video, if you're watching this in Sri Lanka or Cambodia or some far-flung place I haven't thought of, it's possible that in your country, conservatives are people who really care about ecology, that conservatives are people who sincerely care about and want to find a solution for global warming, for water pollution. It's possible that in your country, conservatism is positively associated with gay rights and veganism. But that's not where I'm coming from. That's not the audience that I'm addressing. It's possible somewhere on earth that I don't know of, conservatism is actually associated with atheism and free inquiry. That it's positively associated with the progress of science. But that's not where I'm living, and that's not anywhere I possibly can live in the next 20 years of my life. So my options again are hang around the front door of the left-wing parties, try to offer constructive criticism and guidance so that they can correct for some of these problems, because some of them are real problems, or, I don't know, be totally mutually alienated standing around at a Conservative Party fundraiser where basically people are asking for donations from the rich so that they can commit to providing the rich with lower taxes in the next election cycle. Dave Rubin, I don't believe that you spend any time at those Republican Party fundraisers. I don't believe that you spend time at conservative college campuses, Christian conservative campuses. I don't believe on any of these issues you're speaking either from real experience or a real desire to make the world a better place. But if so, riddle me this. When you look back at what the left accomplished in the last 50 years, and then you look ahead to what the left is likely to accomplish in the next 20 years, which side do you want to be on? Bernie Sanders is not perfect, but I'm telling you right now, the discourse that's going on the whole left wing is infinitely more positive than the discourse that dominated the left from 1979 to 1989, and even from 1999 to 2009. The left really has gotten better, and if you're so freaked out by what you hear SJW saying on Twitter, why don't you spend some time looking at what the alt-right is saying on Twitter? And hey, we've all got to grow up and realize we can't base our political decisions on gossip. At one time, gossip was limited to people standing around a water cooler at the office or standing around the village well. And today, the internet is the whole world's water cooler. So there's a platform for uneducated and angry people to share their grievances and share their feelings as never before. You can't judge the left that way. You can't judge the right that way. You can't come to any meaningful conclusion that way. Dave Rubin, you're a professional journalist. You should know better.
Dun, 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 dun.